Well, here's some more photos and some ideas and a little bit of stuff that I can share. We're all learning all the time and everything. And one of the things that I benefited from when I was over there, and I used to have a video on my YouTube channel of us putting a headliner in my Jeep. We actually took the headliner board out and put it in there on a table, and the lady that taught upholstery was retired, but she came over there to give us a hand putting that headliner fabric on there and showing us how to do it and all that. And I'm probably going to wind up having to do one on my Explorer before long, because it's starting to come loose up there in the very front. But anyway, that video was on my channel and had thousands and thousands of views on it. Well, the lady that brought that came over there, because she was retired at the time, she had a little baby granddaughter with her, and she left it. The little granddaughter was sitting outside the room kind of looking in through the door, and every now and then whenever I was filming her, she'd look over and say, "Hello, hey darling," or whatever, just a little girl would. And there were so many people that were passing judgment because there was a baby sitting outside the door looking in there at us, and they said, "Oh, you're gonna, it's dangerous and the baby shouldn't be there." And I just kept getting hammered with those comments about that baby. It wasn't my baby. It wasn't my idea for her to bring the baby, but I wanted to film us doing the headliner. And so I just eventually took that video down because I got tired of all that negative press, But people are always looking for something to judge you for, Anyway, we did the headliner on this van. All right, now this GM 8088 adhesive is what you're going to do. And I can describe the process here. What you got to do is, that headliner was starting to droop, and getting the headliner out of the vehicle is kind of rough sometimes. But what you do is you peel that fabric off of there, and then you use a wire brush to get the rest of the foam off that's stuck to that fiberglass board, and you got to clean it up really, really, really smooth. And then whenever you lay your fabric on there, you basically lay the fabric, and it's got to be bigger than the board, bigger than it needs to be, obviously. And you fold it back in the middle, and on the part of the board you've exposed, you spray this fabric glue all over it, let it sit there a little bit until it's tacky, and then you take that fabric and lay it over that board, and you use the back of your fingers very gently, smoothing it out and getting the wrinkles out of it, making sure it goes all in the dips in the board and all. And then you fold the other side over that you hadn't done yet, and you do the same thing over there. And then you're going to cut out your holes for your dome lights and your sun visors and all that kind of stuff. That's not very difficult to do. These shops that you take it to do this, for what we did right here with about $80 worth of fabric, they charge $400, $500 to do it. And if you've got the patience to take that out of there and buy some of this fabric that you can get from Amazon. See, this doesn't cost very much. That fabric right there, if you buy a 96 by 60 inch piece, goes up a little when you go up. Any color you want. The cool thing about it is you can change the total looks of the inside of your car by putting different color headliner up there. But this is something that I found out is not very difficult to do. The upholstery instructor told me that she had to run in through his program, and him and his wife would take in 4 or 5 of those headliner jobs during the week, and on the weekend when they were both off work, they would basically knock out 3 or 4 or 5 headliners, and they'd make sometimes $500-600 or more on the weekend just doing nothing but headliners. I thought that was a pretty cool story right there. Anyway, headliners aren't that difficult to take care of. A lot of people put thumbtacks up there and try to do other things, but when that stuff starts to come loose, that foam that started coming loose from the fabric, then you may as well go ahead and take that thing out of there. Now, something else that we did that she said is really wise to do, and we did that on my Jeep, is fold that fabric around over the edge and glue it to the top side, and that way it doesn't droop. Whenever they make it at the factory, like when they put it into the thing when it was new, they actually cover it and then they cut it so that it stops right at the edge. But if you fold it over, it's not going to come loose on the edge and start drooping down. Anyway, that's about all I'm going to say about that. I may make a video one day about that. But this right here was a heck of a job. This was a fairly well-known problem. This brake booster had to be replaced on this 2012 Ford Edge. It belonged to one of the instructors. The brake booster goes right here. And that was a heck of a job. You had to pull the upper intake off and all kinds of stuff to get it out of there. You know, and these brake boosters now, some of these brake boosters are in wacky places. You know, like some of these cars, like seem like BMWs and stuff that I've seen. Well, I've seen them put the brake booster way off out there, right behind the headlight, and run, you know, linkage and everything. I do it, craziest thing I ever saw. But brake boosters they have to be big because they're using atmospheric pressure on one side of the diaphragm to help you apply the brake. So the more help you need applying the brake to give you that power brake feel, the bigger the area of the diaphragm inside the booster has to be, and that's why they're so big. Now, when they didn't have room to put a brake booster on some of these Mustangs with a big motor under the hood and all, they'll use those Hydro Boost brake systems in there where they've got a hydraulic booster, because it's not as space consuming, even though the parts are a little more expensive. Some of the diesels had that; they'd have a hydraulic. We had, and even some of the gas burning Chevy Avalanches, we had to put one of those on a Chevy Avalanche one time because it was leaking hydraulic fluid, you know, from the power steering. And but anyway, that's neither here nor there. But that job, if you've done one of those, you'll know is there's a lot of steps to that. And you got to get a bunch of stuff out of the way to take care of it. This right here is a Vortex choke cooler. Now you might have seen those. They're less popular on the tool trucks now than they used to be when there were a lot of carburetors around. This one here was made by Rotunda, and this thing is cool as all get out because there's no moving parts to it. But when you put compressed air in there, cold air comes out one side and hot air comes out the other side, and it's basically using the vortex effect of the air spinning in this fat chamber right here, and it separates the cold air molecules from the hot ones. And there was a guy that worked next to me over there that had one that looked different from this. It was a silver one that he bought off the tool truck for about $100 or something. And when he would plug his air hose into that one and he kept it going, it would start to literally make frost and snowflakes and stuff coming out the cold side of that thing. My question is, why can't somebody come up with a way to air condition vehicles without refrigerant by using a process like this? As sharp as a lot of these people are, it would seem to me like Elon Musk or somebody would have come up with something instead of having these air conditioner compressors with refrigerant and everything. You don't necessarily have to have refrigerant. If you had a way of doing this right here so that it would, you know, move, you know, you could actually change the valving of it somehow, or maybe you have two different ones in there, because the problem is you would have to have a lot of compressed air coming through there. But think about this: what if you used an air conditioner compressor to provide you with the compressed air that was going to blow through this thing and cause the cold air to come out that side and the hot air to come out the other side? You know, you basically you could either heat or cool a car that way, but that compressor would basically need to, you know, but you'd have to have probably a pretty good volume of air that I don't know if the compressor would be able to handle that. Anyway, it's just a thought that I had, you know, whenever I remembered these choke coolers. If you were having to work on one, you do a choke adjustment, see how it's going to work, you cool the choke off real fast instead of having to waste all the time to let it cool off and all that. And that one that I showed in the picture is one that Rotunda provided for us, you know, as a Ford service tool. And of course you could also buy them on the dual truck. But that just a little thing right there. Now this is a little module story that I had covered, so I don't remember how long ago I told this, but I was going to give you a quick rundown on it. One day I left the house and I was going to drive to the big town up the road and get an engine block I was going after on this 80 model Ford truck. And this thing started sputtering and popping and cutting up with me. And I kind of knew there was going to be a problem with this because I had already seen these rivulets of potting come out from, this is the actual picture of that. It's the original DuraSpark module that was on the truck. And I was seeing these rivulets of potting come. I had seen this on Ford vehicles before with this DuraSpark ignition system. And I said, well, that's going to be a problem. I'm eventually going to have to replace that module because that potting's coming out, something's heating up in there. And so what I did was, whenever this thing started sputtering and popping and cutting up, which totally took me by surprise, they hadn't been doing anything like this, I would turn the key slightly to the start position, not so that it would engage the starter, but so that it would fire up that white wire that gets hot in start. See, there's a start wire and a run wire, and the start wire uses a slightly different circuit in the module. Now this green wire goes out to the coil primary, and this ground right here is actually comes from this screw out that black wire, and the ground is what the module uses to fire the coil. Now what the deal is, and the reason I got a picture of this right here, this is the one that I bought. I turned in at the parts store that was close by because I live over here on the boulevard, and they sold me this one for like $23. And so now you got to remember, my truck would start and run, but when I tried to give it gas to take off, it would sputter and pop and cut up unless I was holding it to the start position. That's one of the things that told me that it was a module, was it ran good with that, if that white wire circuit was powered up in there, but it ran lousy if you just had it on a hot and run wire. All right, so I walked out there, I paid for that module, I walked out there, I unplugged the module that was on the truck, and I just plugged in this one here that I bought. And that thing kicked back. It acted like it had crossed plug wires. It wouldn't start the truck. It was just terrible. And I plugged my module back in and it fired right up. It would idle just fine if you didn't try to pull off from it. So I carried the module back inside there, and I said, look, there's something wrong with this module. It's not working right. And it won't even start my truck. And so the guy walked, and this happened back during the last time we had $4 a gallon gasoline back in the, I think it was in 2012 or something. But anyhow, I says, all right. Says, so let's go. Might have been 2008. I remember when it was. We had $4 a gallon gas last time, but that's what we got now in Alabama this time. It's about $4 a gallon roughly. Maybe it's a lot higher in other places, and it's cheaper in some places. But the point is, the guy plugged it into his machine, and it failed every test his machine put it through. And so he went and got another one off the shelf, and he plugged it in. Now, I was in there wearing a t-shirt and a pair of blue jeans. He didn't know who I was. And I didn't really know him either. I just was a customer off the street driving an old blue 80 model Ford pickup. So he plugs the new one in, and it gives him all green lights on his little display here. And he goes, well, this one here should be okay. I said, okay. So I took it out there, and I plugged that one in, and it's popped and snorted and cut up and kicked back and wouldn't start. And so I went in there and I says, can you come out here and look at this thing? He goes, oh, you're using my parts to try to troubleshoot your truck. We can't have this. I said, just come out here and let me show you what's going on. And so I came out here and I plugged in my module, and it started the truck. I said, you hear this thing running with my module plugged in? He goes, yeah. My module was still mounted on the fender, And so I unplugged that one. I plugged his in, and I spun it over, and it sputtered and popped and kicked back and wouldn't start. And he says, well, doesn't that module have to be grounded to the fender? And I says, no, the purple and orange wires come from the pickup coil. The black one provides the ground to the module, and the module uses that black one to fire the coil. And I says, he said, well, I don't know what this means. He says, I've done a lot of backyard mechanic work, and I've never seen anything like this. And I was thinking, oh, brother. And I said, I tell you what the problem is. Your machine over here doesn't tell you the truth. It doesn't really load any of the circuits the same way a regular ignition will. And so that machine's not trustworthy, and there's something wrong with this batch of modules. You might recognize the brand name. I'm not going to say it here, but the point is, notice it looked different than the module than it seemed to me like it ought to. I didn't really like that. Not that it matters what it looked like if it works, but he says, well, I'm just going to give you your money back and let you go somewhere else and get a module. See, I could drive my truck, but it just sputtered and popped and cut up. I'd have to hold it to start to keep it from, jumping and bucking so much. So I said, okay. So he gave me my money back, and I drove down to another parts house and bought a module exactly like the one you see right here, and that took care of the whole problem. Now, when I sold that truck to my uncle from Texas, that module was still on there, and he drove the truck all the way to Texas with that module on it. Now, I will say that on the way to Texas, the truck blew a head gasket, but the module had nothing to do with that. Anyway, this right here is the little wiring schematic that I put together on how this thing works. And, it's got a resistor wire right here. And so you got a noise capacitor over here. That noise capacitor can short out and cause problems too. But here's your coil right here, primary and secondary, right? And so the coil wire that goes to the distributor is this big fat black one here. And so the primary wire is actually switched. This here is doing the job the points used to do in the old distributor. There's your pickup coil. And as this little reluctor goes wheeling past that thing, it makes a wave. And you can basically see how it would, whenever it's got that. Now the interesting thing about the old Chrysler modules, the ones you might remember, the ones that came out in the early 70s, is you could unplug the wires from the distributor, and it was a little 2-wire rubber connector, and if you just got a piece of horseshoe stripped wire on each side, and you just touch those two terminals together, you know, touch, 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 it would pop, 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 and fire the coil every time. And I had often wondered, I never tried to do this, it looks to me like if you did that right, you could put a distributor in one of those that had a set of points in it, and it would do the same job. Some of the Asian cars have the little sets of points in the distributor they use for a trigger for their igniter, you know, one way or another. That was the deal on that. Now if this ground right here, if there's something wrong with that ground wire, it won't run. Because it uses this ground, you might notice, even in the schematic, that ground is what it uses to trigger the coil to fire. And the condenser and stuff like you'd ordinarily have in your points distributors buried in this box right here. But all right, know these screws and bits and when to use this stuff. These little screws and bits, you know, that's obviously a Torx. There's also an inverted Torx where the bolt has got, you know, this sticking up off of it, and you've got a socket like this. I don't have that right there, obviously, everybody's on. But these Posi-Drive looks kind of like a Phillips, but if it's got those, you notice that Posi-Drive's got those little mountains in the valleys. That Posi-Drive grabs that so much better than a Phillips grabs a Phillips. And a lot of people will use a Phillips on those, and they'll use a Posi-Drive on them. But if you'll use the right one, the difference with this, if you put a Posi-Drive screw in the vise, and you take a Posi-Drive screwdriver, this is a number 2, this will run it the right size for your screw, you can stand that screwdriver up, and it will stand up without falling over in there. You notice that this is tapered and all, and how square that is, and how it's got them extra little star teeth and all. That's pretty cool. Now, this works better on this than that does. So if you're operating with a lot of these and you can get a Torx that fits nice and snug in there, you'll do better with these. Whenever one of these tries to round out, and sometimes they will, and you know, and especially if some yo-yo's not real careful with a power tool with, you know, screw bouncing on it, and, you know, students can mess things up to the point to where it takes tremendous amounts of skill for the guy that's doing the teaching to fix what they've screwed up. But I would take this valve grinding compound, and you would be totally astonished at putting some of that gritty gray stuff on the tip of your screwdriver. When you've got one of these that's just about rounded out, it will give a whole lots of little purchase points inside there, and it will bring that right on out of there. It's pretty darn handy stuff. I would not be without this in my toolbox. I really like that stuff. This is when a rusted in 15 millimeter head exhaust bolt has changed sizes, and it's no longer a 15 millimeter, and it's not a 14. Now you don't know, a 16 is the same as a 5/8. A 15 is between a 5/8 and a 9/16, and a 9/16 is between a 15 and a 14. So what I did here was, whenever I could tell this was going to turn into a problem, I got this gear wrench wiggler that was a 9/16, and I went ahead, and I didn't even have to have the valve grinding compound, because this thing right here was too little for a 15, but it was slightly too big for a 9/16. And I put that thing up in there on that bolt, on that exhaust bolt, with an extension that was the shortest extension I could get on it, and then I used my air hammer with a pointy bit up in that extension, and I went and I drove that up on that where it was, I mean, it was gripping that thing super, super tight. And then I spun that bolt all the way out of there, and of course I replaced the bolt with a new one when I went it back in there. But you might notice these exhaust threads are different than regular bolt threads. They're actually got kind of flat bottoms in there, so they're trying to make them where they're less likely to seize up. But I like to put anti-seize compound on those. Now the irritating thing about some of these Chevy trucks is some smart aleck engineer decided they wanted to use stainless steel nuts and studs on the exhaust, which was about the dumbest thing anybody could ever do. Back in the day, they would have steel exhaust studs and they'd have brass nuts on there, and that worked really good. But stainless steel will gall and rust and seize just as bad as anything else will. I ran into that when I was working down on the coast. That salt air would cause that stainless steel to gall, and you will not cut a stainless steel with torch. I mean, if you get it hot enough, you might melt it off of there, but if you get it red hot, pulling the trigger on your torch to put that 40 pounds of oxygen pressure does nothing but school the stainless steel off because it doesn't oxidize like regular metal. But anyway, we've had to fight with some of those darn things, and getting those nuts off of these studs are up in a really, really tight place. The scary thing about putting a torch up in there is you may set other things on fire, so you got to be really careful about that. You will license plates to seal, to shield it and all that. Anyway, we got that one out by doing that, and took a picture of that. Now this right here, we were trying to do an alignment on this Nissan Pathfinder, I think it was. Might be an Xterra, I can't remember, but anyway, you can probably look at it if you know that your Nissans and you can tell. And this was so seized up that it absolutely would not move. I mean, it was just seized up something horrible, and we couldn't do an alignment on it. You see, you got that eccentric on here. And so I just got him with a metal cutting bit on that saw to cut that thing off of there, and then we got a 4-inch metal cutting tool on a high-speed cutter, and we cut up in there, and we wound up, we put a brand new A-frame on there, and we could do the alignment then, and it was just a real grueling job. You got to be really tough on that. You ever get in there trying to do an alignment, you find out that the stuff you need, it's bad out of alignment, you need to fix it, but the stuff you need to do to straighten the mess out is terrible. And they actually make some kits that you can buy that you can replace the original parts with parts that are easier to work with. Like they'll have these turnbuckle style links and all that you can use them. Stuff like some of your Dodge Neons and stuff like that, or Chrysler Neons. Now this is a fun and easy upsell. You see this coming in here with these sway bar links, bouncing around ugly like this. This is a heck of a lot of fun. Now what I had to notice, that's a self-locking nut because it's staked in there so it won't come loose. But what I had to basically do was to make sure that when I gave one of the students his job is they knew how to stack this stuff together, because they'll do it wrong if you're not really careful. But you got to make sure that, this is turned the right way and that's turned the right way. And I found uses for these little dish-shaped washers. I'll show you one in just a minute. But that little spacer's got to be in there right. But that is a fairly easy job to do. The sway bar links don't cost that much either. You can buy those things. I don't mind buying something like a DriveWorks brand sway bar link, because it's just bolts and bushings and stuff anyway. Every time I saw this, or if you hear a vehicle when it's going over bumps going don't, don't, plum, plum, if you look under there, you're probably going to see sway bar links that are shot like this one here. And that's a really nice and easy upsell that I always enjoyed doing. Now this is what I use this little dished piece right here when I have some of those left over. We were going to take this out. You got to take the little snap ring out of there. This is up under, I think it was an Expedition or an F-150 or something. And we actually took that snap ring out, but we could not get this out. Well, the cover actually, this cover right here that was up under it with the O-ring on it. But that cover has a threaded hole in it. And because of, we couldn't work it out of there, I got this little thing here, and when I put it up there, and I got this 6mm bolt, and I screwed it up in there really, really as far as I could into this little cover here, and then I tightened the nut against that. And we managed to, when I tightened the nut against that, it actually unseated this and pulled it out of there. And we were able to get that desiccant bag out of there and then put another one up in there. But I will tell you that these knotheads didn't put the snap ring in there like they should to put this thing back in there. And whenever we cranked it up and it started building pressure, it blew this thing back out of there, and it got refrigerant all over the place. It scared the daylights out of the guys that were working on it. So I had to follow along behind them the next time around. You can see them little desiccant balls in there. I had to follow around behind them next time, make sure they had the snap ring in there the right way, because if it's just only halfway slopped in there, it may look right, but you got to make sure it is right, because a snap ring can look like it's in place and not be in its little groove. Now this right here, if you got a brake pull, now this one here measured out okay, but these little pads, they're little pressure pads. When it's Innovative Products of America 7884 brake pad pressure tester, you can look that up, and you can buy these, I think, on Amazon. They even sell them. You put this between the pad and the you squeeze the caliper piston back, and you put these pads between the brake pad and the rotor. All right, and then whenever you apply the brake, they've got this needle will push that little pointer up, so that, let's say that you've got one that's pulling to the right or pulling to the left, and you do this test and you find out that one side is only putting out 1,000 pounds of pressure and the other side's putting out 2,000, then you've at least isolated the fact that there's not enough pressure going to one side as there is the other side, and that's going to be the reason for your pull. Now, it may be an ABS hydraulic control unit, or it may be something else. It may be, a collapsed hose on the inside or whatever. But the long and the short of it is, this is a doggone fancy tool. Now, I will tell you that if you buy a good set of these, you're going to pay a couple $100 or more, between $200 and $300 for a set like that. But I've got a set of those, I think, out there in the back of my Explorer, unless I forgot and left them. I mean, they belong to me, unless I forgot and left them at the new program I started up over in this town down the road here. Doesn't matter really. But if you're working on brakes every day and you find brake pulls giving you a hard time, this set of gauges is handy, handy, handy. That little knob there is how you turn this, you turn that little indicator needle back down so that it rests against the needle that's going to respond to the pressure. And this right here, you don't have to have a helper, because you can get in there and mash the brakes yourself. Now, you're not going to do this with a car going down the road. You're only going to do it with it on the left, okay? So when that thing goes up there, you can get out and see where that red needle is pointing. And you can tell, you see how both of these are pointing about the same one? This is one side of the car and that's the other. This is a handy tool that you need if you do a lot of brake work. Now, I had a noise from a cracked catalyst right here on an Altima. And I looked down in that catalyst, and the catalyst actually looked really good down on the inside. The brick was still intact and all that, so I wasn't really concerned about it coming apart. I'll talk about that in a minute. But whenever this thing came in and there was a noise, it sounded like it was coming from under the back, close to where the passenger side of the bulkhead is. And we were listening back there, but that noise was being carried by the heat shield all the way underneath that cover that's on top of the engine, and it was being amplified way back there in front of the passenger side. And so what I did was I pulled this thing off and I sent it over to the welding department, and they do good work over there, and they welded up that crack. Now, if you're welding a crack in something that's cast iron, it's really kind of difficult to do unless you're really, really good at welding, because whenever you weld it and it cools, it'll wind up cracking again if it's cast iron. Mild steel doesn't typically do that quite so bad. But anyway, they welded that up. We put it back on. We got that one fixed for not much money at all, because it cost $200 or $300 for a replacement catalyst, and we really need to do that. I will say, one of the guys, whenever he took this cover off, that little, how those little bosses have got those nuts welded in them, and you run bolts in there. He popped one of those off, and that had to be taken care of too. But on the ones that, a lot of the times, you'll see if an Altima comes in with the engine knocking, and I just about guarantee you that if you investigated this Altima that's sitting not far from where I live, I took that picture when I was driving by, that Altima is probably sitting there because this catalyst came apart and it rattled a bunch of that catalyst clay up in there, that old hard rock stuff. And like on some of the SHO Tauruses, when the catalyst came apart, it would make its way through the EGR system into the intake and down into the engine, and it would just ruin the engine. And we would have these Altimas coming in here, knocking and carrying on, and whenever they were coming and knocking and carrying on like that, one of the first things I'd do was look inside if you could pull the oxygen sensor out, usually on most of them, and you get down in there with your borescope, which is how I got this picture right here. And this thing is coming apart. It has made its way into the engine, which, of course, with the pulsation in the exhaust system anyway, and this catalyst is going to be right there at the engine, it can actually pull this stuff, bounce some of this as it's flying around in that exhaust manifold. It'll pull it back into the engine, even if it doesn't follow the EGR path through there. So, but this catalyst will destroy an engine, and you can see Altimas sitting needing engines, or they were parked, usually because they needed an engine because of this nonsense right here, which we put some engines in Altimas for this reason, you know. I wanted to cover that. Now, sometimes people, bless their heart, when I'm, you know, sitting there looking at something like this, they're just trying to get by, you know, that this is going to take some work. Somebody ran into it and bent this out of shape and all that, and their hatch and gate doesn't work right, but they're trying to just keep their tail light in place because it's, you know, flopping around, falling out of there. And so I see a lot of this kind of thing. I saw this one guy that had this mirror taped onto the right side of his Camaro. I thought he did a whale of a job with that tape on that thing. Well, you can give people some tape and they can fix stuff now. And this right here, in some states where there's vehicle inspections, this wouldn't be allowed. We don't have state vehicle inspections in Alabama, and this kind of thing is something you'll see fairly regular. And every now and then I'll see a car that people are just struggling trying to get by with, and that's what's going on right here. Now this was Mom's 73 Imperial, and this was, she had a 440 in that thing. You could not even put a finger on one of the spark plugs. It was so darn aggravating to get to. But anyway, that's my 69 LTD. It had a 390 in it. It got 18 miles to the gallon. First car I ever had that had air conditioning on it. And this Bulldog right here, there's a story about him. Mama used to feed just about every dog that come into the yard. This dog right here, for a while, was the only dog that we had because they were, you know, we would let them kind of run free, and if they got run over, they got run over, you know, because they were strays anyway. We never paid for a dog in our entire life. And sometimes we pay to have them, you know, vaccinated against rabies, and, you know, Dad would get some pills to give where they wouldn't have worms and that kind of stuff. But this Bulldog right here was a friendly dog. Had a big spot on his side. My sister named him Spot. And whenever dogs came that Mama would start feeding, this dog would carry those dogs down into the woods, and they would both come back muddy. And, you know, sometimes there would be two other dogs besides this one, and he kept bringing those dogs back muddy until finally, and this happened more than once or twice, he would keep bringing whatever dog it was back to the swamp with him, because we lived out in the country, and back in there was swamp and stream and all that kind of stuff. They'd come back with mud all over their belly and their legs and everything, and he would keep carrying them down there until finally he was the only one that came back. And I think that dog was carrying them down there and getting them snake bit, but I'm not sure. That's about the only reason that he would go down in the swampy areas with them and come back, and they would not come back with him, and we'd never see those dogs again. Now, I never went down there looking for them. They were stray dogs anyway. But one of the things that was wacky about this dog, not long after he had done that with several other dogs, there was an old, you know how when you pull the tires off of an old trailer and you just kind of got it sitting there on blocks or whatever. There was an old trailer out there, and I walked along and I noticed that dog was just kind of lying over against one of the hubs on that trailer where the wheels had been taken off of it. And he was dead. And he wasn't probably 3 or 4 years old. He was a young dog. And it was almost like he had just been walking along and he had just fell over and died. And he's dead as a hammer, but it was like he wasn't laying on the ground. He was laying against that trailer like he'd been walking along, and he fell over against it. Now there's an outside chance that lightning could have struck that trailer and it could have come out the hub and got him, and then he fell over, but I didn't see any scorch marks on his hide or anything like that. Anyway, I had to take that dog and get the tractor and the slip scoop and bury him. But that's what I remember about that Bulldog right there. He eventually died after having somehow or another murdered other dogs by throwing them to the snakes. I'm assuming that anyway, but I know that he led more than one dog down there, and then he came back without them. Now, my Aunt Leslie's Crown Vic, he was making what I would have sworn in a court of law was a left rear bearing noise. And so we pull the back cover off, and we pull the, you know, have the C-clips off and all that hogwash. And I pull this axle out, and I was expecting, because it was terrible, when you swerve back and forth, you could hear it coming from way back there in the back. It was really nasty, ugly noise, and there was nothing wrong with this bearing. There was nothing wrong with the surface the bearing rode on. It was absolutely perfect, and I realized that I had misfired on trying to find the noise, and by the time I tracked this noise down on her car, it was a bad left front tire, and I have never in my life figured out how I managed to. Of course, I will tell you that I've told you this before on these videos, that noises will telegraph from one part of the car to the other and make you think that they're somewhere they're not. If you've got front bearings and you got a noise in the front bearing and you're trying to determine which one it is, like my Explorer's starting to develop a bad bearing, either in front or the back. It's just whoa, 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 I'm hearing this kind of thing, and I'm going to wait until it gets a little bit worse, and I might make a video about it whenever I'm changing the bearing or finding it, whatever. Anyway, but you can actually get thrown for a loop by even doing the swerving test. You know, if you swerve the car to the left, you're unloading the bearing on the on the left side. In other words, if I swerve to the left, right, the car is going to be weighted on the right, and the left is going to lose its load. So I swerve it to the right, and the right one has lost its load, and the left one's loaded more heavy. And you can actually use due diligence to try to find exactly which bearing it is, and still wind up misfiring, putting a bearing on there that it didn't need, because you would have sworn that it was on that side when it was on the other side. So this guy that owns the tire store down here, just to be sure, he replaces both bearings whenever he's running into a situation like, he just sells them a pair. And that's not a bad practice, to tell you the truth, but I always tried to teach my students to be surgical in the way that they figured out, you know, what the problem was for troubleshooting and all. Which one of the angles shown here caused this tire to wear like this? You notice how there's more tread here than there is there, right? This one's starting to wear out. So if you're looking at this is left caster, right caster, front left camber, front right camber, left steering axis inclination, right steering axis inclination. Look at these and weigh in on this. I'm going to just let you guys weigh in on it on the comment section if you're interested in doing so. And tell me which of the angles you see in here, you can freeze this if you want to, caused this tire to wear this way. And let me know with a comment. That's going to be a little quiz right there. All right. This week's Dead Rides were sitting out there. I probably took this picture about 20 years ago, and I was thinking, you know, there's a lot of people that would probably like to have that 56 Chevrolet right there. This van, not so much. Typically when somebody's got a van parked out like that, they're using it to store stuff, you know, or they're using it for a greenhouse or something. But it's got all them ladders on top. Oh, what is this guy doing with some doggone many aluminum ladders? Beats all I've ever seen. But they got banana trees down here and all that nonsense. But anyway, these are the two dead rides. If I'm not mistaken, I took this same path to work every day for many, many years. If I'm not mistaken, this vehicle eventually disappeared, but that one still kept sitting there for obvious reasons. But you might notice somebody had this one kind of fixed up at some point anyway, because the wheels that are got on it are some kind of fancy mag wheels. Anyway, it was an interesting little shot right there. And so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to say that's all for today. I really appreciate you guys watching, and I hope I didn't keep you away from your work too long. And we'll talk to you next time.